Invented in Italy and perfected in Germany, and from there it traveled all around the world. Do you know where your piano was manufactured? Hi, this is Ted with Alamo Music Center in beautiful downtown San Antonio, Texas.
I'm Patrick Marr. You can find us online at alamomusic.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our YouTube channels, check out our other videos, sign up for notifications, and leave us comments. We'd love to interact with you guys. Well, Ted, you had some great insight earlier when we were talking about this topic.
Yeah, it's funny because at one time there was over 10,000 piano manufacturers in this country. And then now I think there's 3. If you look in latest news, there's 3. And the piano was originally invented in Italy, and then it moved to Germany, where it really caught on. And then we were talking about how custom guitar works and custom things. Originally, every piano that was made was a custom build. And then they had orders. So every instrument that was manufactured originally was manufactured for a particular purchaser. And those were usually like feudal lords and kings and all those related royalty. And from there, the piano grew all over Europe. And the primary first choice piano manufacturers were German and Austrian. From there, the piano moved over into Western Europe, where you had British and French manufacturers enter, and then eventually it moved over to the United States, where we've actually had people building pianos here in the 18th century. And then what really popularized the piano was when Wurlitzer invented the spinet, and that put a piano in almost every American's home. And that's around the time when there was over 10,000 different manufacturers in this country.
We had a few here in San Antonio.
We had a lot. And that brings me back to another thing, is that most of what people know about piano manufacturing and pianos right now, I don't want to say it's myth and legend, but it's just no longer true, because we're talking about new pianos and they're not manufactured in this country anymore. They're manufactured someplace else. So a lot of the old wives' tale, when people are out looking at old pianos, pianos are interesting because there's always granny stories, there's aunt stories, and there's wives' tales that go with pianos. And a lot of those like superstitions, I'll never own one of these pianos because my friend had one. That doesn't apply anymore. I mean, the world is entirely different. Most of the pianos being sold in the world today are manufactured in Japan or by Japanese companies. And China is moving into a predominant position as well.
I think we read somewhere that now 1 in every 3 pianos in the US is a manufactured in China piano. And so some of these brands, like you were talking about, some of these brands are actually outsourcing, or they actually have their own factories in China, but they're outsourcing labor to Chinese market, building there, and then importing here into the US. And a lot of that has to do with just the cost of labor. There's such a demand for a quality instrument at an affordable price. And one of the reasons we have a digital piano here right behind us is because this has almost been the acoustic piano killer.
Correct.
It's almost, and I say almost because it will never replace it. We've done videos before where we're comparing digital versus acoustic. There's a huge difference. And there's a lot of craftsmanship that goes into building an acoustic instrument. Like you said, there was over 10,000 manufacturers here in the US alone. In the US, these builders were going through, and there's over 10,000 parts in the piano. So they're going through and they're making this a playable instrument, really a craftsman instrument. It was not easy to make a piano, but it is almost an alive thing once you're finished with the product. And that quality just had to slowly go downhill because labor costs kept going up and up. And then we saw, I think what you were saying in the 70s, we saw, they call it the introduction of the Japanese instruments. Yamaha, Kawai came to the United States. People had pianos in their home. They had those spinets. Grandma always had one, and then the parents had one. The kids played. Everyone played piano. It was the staple of the home. We started seeing an introduction of new instruments into the market in the 70s, 80s, and 90s come around. Korean instruments started showing up. Samick and Young Chang started showing up in the United States. And they were affordable, and they were quality, and they were high polished, and we saw them everywhere. We see a lot of used ones now. They were held onto for a long time. And then we saw a shift again when a lot of these American companies couldn't keep up with the Japanese and the Korean-made pianos. And in the 80s and the 90s, you saw the acquisition of a lot of American companies.
A lot of acquisition, merging in piano companies, and then also consolidation of factories. And then the perfection of stencil pianos.
The perfection. And what's funny is, at one point, Yamaha and Kawai bought American factories. I think Yamaha moved to the Emerson factory.
Everett in Michigan.
There's lots of names. We have a whole book. Piano Atlas is full of brands. And the Everett, they moved to the Everett factory in Georgia, and they built Yamaha pianos here in the U.S. So it's really interesting to see, this is a Yamaha. Was it made in Japan? Was it made in the U.S. for a couple years there? Was it made in Indonesia? Was it made in China? It's all Yamaha. It's all Yamaha quality. But does it matter? This is the question we're asking today. Does it matter where my piano was made?
Well, a lot of people ask, and they always have this quizzical look on their face. This piano was made in Indonesia. And they could barely buy into the concept of buying a Chinese piano, but the Indonesian pianos are actually, some of them, far ahead, because the factories in Indonesia are actually set up by the larger of the Japanese manufacturers. So they set up like their own sub-plants, not inside China, so that their product is not actually confused with Chinese product. But the one thing about the Chinese manufacturing of pianos is 25 years ago, we had some come in, and a lot of those came back. And Pearl River is the one company that stuck with their piano manufacturing. And one thing that, at least sometimes here in the US, we forget is that manufacturing leads to consumerism. And that has never been more true than it has been in China for the last 25 to 30 years. As they got more manufacturing and doing a lot of manufacturing for the world, well, China opened up to be the largest consumer market, which is why Pearl River is one of the has the largest piano factory in the world. And they make a great quality piano. They build pianos for Steinway. Kawai builds pianos for Steinway.
It's crazy. Steinways, there's more Steinways sold in China now than there are in the US.
Correct.
Which is an incredible statistic. And so there are these different manufacturing plants in places, and asking that question, does it matter where it's made? I think it matters who made it, and it matters, is this a quality instrument? If you have a player, if you have someone who can sit down and play it, a piano teacher, someone you trust who plays piano, I think it's important. All of these are made a little differently. It's all wood that comes from a tree that can be different. And the quality of that wood and the quality of the other parts of the piano can really change how an instrument's made. And with the invention of robotics in manufacturing, a lot of corners have been cut.
Well, a lot of corners have been cut, and then they've been replaced. This is the one thing that has kind of gotten into the, when I use the word hybrid manufacturing, I'm not talking about an instrument that's two things like a hybrid car. It's like hybrid manufacturing. So you take the higher quality components that are generally missing in a new manufacturer's facility, and that would be like getting high-end yield wool into the proper kind of hammers and dampers, properly treated soundboards. And I have a whole video I want to present just on soundboards that talks about what kind of trees, where the trees have to be located to make an acceptable soundboard for an Austrian or German piano. And how does that change when it goes to a Chinese or an Indonesian manufacturer? Well, what happens a lot is you'll take these German components of the action, the hammers, and the dampers and the strings, and sometimes the soundboards, and take a crate load of these and ship them to their factory in China or Indonesia to where they're robotically assembled, except that the crucial components are made by the original manufacturer, or they're using imported higher quality parts.
So very, very interesting stuff. We are seeing a shift in the way things are manufactured. I think it's important to realize pianos sometimes get lumped into a luxury good, even though it's a usable instrument that a lot of people strive to play their entire life. So you think about cars, you think about watches, and where these are manufactured really speaks a lot about the quality going into it. And so, of course, you're going to find a better value sometimes in the lower cost item. You're going to say, hey, I'm willing to sacrifice A, B, or C to get a good action or a great sound or a bigger piano or a nicer looking finish. And so there's these compromises that sometimes have to be made. And because manufacturing has become accessible, and because we're seeing a lot more Chinese manufactured instruments here in the US, the quality has slowly started to trickle up. And you can find a Chinese piano that's very expensive and a very high quality instrument. And so it's important to realize that all these are different in who's making them. speaks a lot about the
Sure
instrument.
does.
And in Indonesian, you were saying this, in the Indonesian factories that are actually built by Yamaha, by Kawai, and by Samick. Samick is a Korean company. Kawai is a Japanese, Yamaha is a Japanese company. They built these factories in Indonesia to lower the cost of building the instrument. Just the way economics works, they were able to get these instruments built with the same quality that they strive for in Japan. And they say, hey, we're willing to bring this in at half the price of what it costs to build here in Japan. And you're going to save money on it, but it's going to be a quality Yamaha, Kawai, or Samick. And we see a lot of those entering the US market, and we see a lot of them on the used market. And it's interesting because back in the day when you thought of quality, European, American,
Sure.
these American companies were Baldwin. We haven't even talked about Baldwin.
No, we haven't included that. They're actually owned and operated by Gibson Guitars right now, and they've been building pianos for about the last 10 or 11 years. They've contracted it out to their Chinese
2009.
facility.
Yeah,
2009.
so 11 years this year, all Baldwin pianos are made in China. But what the story of Baldwin is a rich history of a United States manufacturer.
And even, when I talked about the hybrid manufacturing, some of the pianos that were top of the line Baldwins, they had Renner actions inside their top 2 concert grand models. And they would have, now Baldwin at one time had their own wool processing facility. They were a different story. They had their own steel mill. They had all kind of things. And bit by bit over time with all the mergers and acquisition, the company just kind of got lost in that wood scandal that Gibson had. And that was part of Baldwin as well. So now they're just manufactured in China. And the other thing too is, like, you talk about the hybrid manufacturing, is some of the older pianos, including Kimball was one of those companies that used to make a phenomenal concert type grand piano that had it had the Schwander action in it, which was the British action. And all of those pianos played different. They played special. They had more like an Austrian feel to it. The piano I go to in the last couple of weeks, every time I come in, is that Schimble, and it has a Renner action in it. And so these are Austrian-made pianos, and the British action, I think they've been making action since 1835. So the Schwander action, anytime you play a piano, it's like, man, this one plays it. It's always, you can look at some of the components. So the history of piano has always been getting better components, regardless of the manufacturer. And now we've seen it in the last 20 years get to where it's just pinpointed down to where these premier companies, particularly Yamaha and Kawai and Samick, have gotten down this, we can take these process, put these soundboards and put these over here, but make them over here so we can keep our labor costs down.
So really, we just wanted to present kind of where the piano market is today. And so if you were to walk into a music store, walk into a piano showroom, if you're looking at instruments under $10,000, it's going to be made where? China or in Indonesia?
China.
So China or Indonesia is going to be the primary source under $10,000, brand new from a manufacturer. And you're going to see brands like Samick, or Samick stencils out a whole bunch of names. So you might see an old piano manufacturer name, one of those US names, and it's going to be a Samick, or it's going to be another Chinese manufacturer that puts on, they've bought the rights to the label and they're going to put it on there.
Correct.
And so even a Baldwin, if you see a new Baldwin, it's going to be made in China. But those pianos are going to be the sub $10,000 category. Anything from like the 10 to, I would say, 30,000, you're looking at Japanese manufactured, you're looking at some European manufacturers, not US. If you're looking for plus $30,000, that's when you start moving into these US companies, especially the majority of Steinway's line is going to be way over $30,000. There are a couple uprights that kind of fall under that price range. And then there's Mason and Hamlin here in the United States. And then there's the premium European companies, Bosendorfer, Fazioli, these Bechstein.
Right.
These are going to be
Luther.
like, you're looking up at 6 figures almost on some of these pianos. So the price changes are very indicative of quality of materials, craftsmanship, playability. But there is great choices in every price range, and that sub $10,000 price range, there is great choices.
Phenomenal instruments. That's the most important thing, is that in this day and age, because of the competitiveness of all manufacturing, but particularly something as precise as pianos, is that almost every single acoustic piano that's getting put out, if it's not up to par, company's not going to be able to make them.
They're not going to stick around very long. A piano is something that really needs to perform well for it to stick around.
Right.
Piano teachers are the most important part of this whole entire industry. And if they have students that are struggling on instruments, they're going to say, "Don't go buy this. It's a bad product." And so these things get weeded out after a little bit.
Sure.
And so it's important to realize new pianos and used pianos are very different beasts. And so if you're looking for an American-made instrument, you can find a nice used one. And we've done videos on new versus used piano. So I would recommend checking those videos out because that's a whole different conversation. And you can find some quality US-made, European-made, Japanese-made for that under $10,000 if you're looking for it, but you're not going to be buying a new piano. And I think that's important to realize. And really, lastly, I think we wanted to talk about the future of pianos. Where are things going as a piano industry, as a manufacturing piano industry? What are we going to see in the next 10, 15 years? Will digital pianos continue to rise like we've seen?
I believe so, because I think that in the future, I believe that a lot of this manufacturing of pianos is going to get trimmed down even more to where eventually most piano manufacturers will be making a few models of grand pianos that are going to be primarily performance instruments, and the same thing with an upright piano.
Mm-hmm.
All the ones with different furniture cases and all, I think those days of piano manufacturing and buying are gone.
It's hard to find it.
It's very hard, but the one thing about a digital piano is you can get very, very good. You can get phenomenal skills, sight reading ability, everything, and no one could have ever heard you play. And then when you get onto a real piano, you're going to need some time to rehearse and to practice to bring out the real true beauty of the instrument. It's hard to get the true beauty of the instrument off of a digital as opposed to an open harp with ringing harmonic strings. That's an entirely different beast. But I think in the future, playing a grand piano is going to be something like, flying in an actual best simulator. You're starting to see that now. But it's
like driving a manual car.
It is. It's like
harder and harder to find a manual car nowadays. But I agree, and I think digital pianos, we didn't even touch on where they're manufactured, but a lot of them, China, Indonesia, where it's cheapest to get the labor put together. And manufacturers, on the other hand, they love digital technology because they continuously can innovate and put better features in it, and the older models become obsolete quicker, and they make more sales.
It's kind of interesting to know that they're trying to emulate a $280,000 instrument into a couple $1,000 digital. They're trying to give you the same effect inside and the same simulation, and it's really getting real close.
Yeah, and so I think we will in the next couple of years, next 50 years even, we'll see a greater divide in that very high-end, specially put together, very limited concert grands, performance instruments. We'll see less and less of those, and we'll see more of these affordable digitals and maybe affordable Chinese, Indonesian-made pianos because the stigma's kind of going away. Back when Chinese pianos first entered the U.S. markets, people were like, "Oh, stay away from Chinese manufactured pianos. They're not good. They're not good." Over time, when Yamaha actually entered China, they had to train Pearl River on how to make some of these instruments, and we saw quality.
They had a 10-year business plan.
They had a business plan to say, "Hey, Pearl River, the Chinese government, because they can control a lot, say, hey, Yamaha, if you want to come here into China, you're going to have to stay with one of our manufacturers and teach them a business partnership, like you said, 10 years, and show them some of your processes because Yamaha just makes incredible instruments." And so things like that really increase the production value of the Chinese market. And so I think we will see more and more quality instruments at an affordable price, but those really high-end European, US-made, those are going to be more and more unobtainable almost.
Sure. And we had talked about custom made, and originally the piano business was a custom made industry. And the last piano I've heard that was custom made, because manufacturers, they do custom work, and a lot of times there's boutique manufacturers that do that. But the last custom made piano that I'm aware of was by Yamaha, and it was I think it's a C7, and it was made it's a Yamaha, and it's a C7 Grand, and it was made purple for Prince. So he was going to do his last tour on that solo piano. And lately, I think Alicia Keys have been using, you've seen it showed up on some of these singing shows and on a couple of artist videos. Yeah. Lady Gaga, I think, has played that.
And so the finish options have always been something that you they strive to like make custom, but it's really hard to find that furniture style.
Hey, 20 years ago, Ben Folds had custom-made pianos from Baldwin, and now they're gone.
He can't replace
You
it.
can't replace it.
So we really just wanted to bring up where your piano might be made and what that speaks about your piano. There's a lot of great instruments coming out of pretty much everywhere. There's nice Korean-made, Japanese-made, Chinese-made, Indonesian-made. Of course, if you go to the European countries, you're going to find super high-quality pianos. The United States made thousands and thousands and thousands of pianos from thousands of manufacturers. So there's a whole plethora of those. We could spend hours just listing the manufacturers. You have probably seen them all over Craigslist and Facebook Marketplace. The quality varies on those because they were, like you said, very custom made to standards of hundreds of different people here in the United States. And so a spinet piano isn't even manufactured anymore, so we would say be wary of picking one of those. But there's a lot of quality uprights here in the US that were older pianos that were manufactured. Well, Ted, it was fun talking about some of these old pianos. Thank you guys for watching. We are Alamo Music Center in San Antonio, Texas. You can find us online at alamomusic.com where we can answer any questions. We have a lot of used pianos. We got a lot of new pianos. If you have any questions, please ask us. We love to answer those. Again, if you haven't, please subscribe to our YouTube channels. Check out our other videos. Sign up for notifications. Like our videos. Leave us comments. We love to interact with you guys. Ted?
It's been great.
Thank you guys.